HighRadius inherited a 50-member team.
Mm.
Different challenge in terms of really entrenching yourself as a leader when you have an existing team in place and a high-performing team at that. So the first priority was really to ensure that all of us are aligned and shooting towards the same target.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. My name is Lydia, and joining us today is Abhishek Day of HighRadius. Welcome, Abhishek. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lydia. Good afternoon.
Abhishek, walk us through your experience in talent acquisition and tell us a little bit about your current role at HighRadius. You're the VP of Talent Acquisition.
Sure. So my journey with talent acquisition started with Microsoft, where I was part of the Bing hiring team. So it was like this little startup within a large organization. I loved it. Post that, worked with LinkedIn, Uber, Alcon, came back to tech with Uber. And then I've been with startups, SaaS startups, BrowseStack, the first one, and now HighRadius. At HighRadius, I manage India and Europe hiring. BrowseStack was global, had Americas as well with me, and really enjoyed the sort of 10 to 100 sort of journey that we were on at BrowseStack, and obviously HighRadius operates at a much larger scale. So looking forward to how this journey pans out.
And it's interesting, you've seen what it's like to be a startup in a large ecosystem and also a startup on its own. So have there been any takeaways or any kind of best practices you have for someone in a similar position?
Yeah, I think back at Microsoft, the Microsoft name would open doors, whatever, to get into Microsoft, right? Well, back then, we were not necessarily just competing with the Amazons and the Googles of the world. We were also competing with Windows and Office division for top talent. Vis-a-vis for a startup, a standalone startup, the sell job for the recruiter is much higher. The storytelling that's required is more intense and has to be authentic. That someone has to really believe it to sell it. And that's where the real trick is, because the opportunities, well, now the market's cooled down, but then back in 2021, everyone had multiple opportunities. And the differentiating factor for someone to take a conversation forward or not would be that first reach out and call from the recruiter. So I firmly believe that in a startup, especially, recruiters have to be wonderful storytellers.
And you've taken that experience and moved into smaller and smaller entities, or rather setup, right? And you've seen growth, incredible exponential growth. So in HighRadius, what are some areas that you prioritize, especially in this first half of the year, given the competitive landscape that we're seeing for talent and also some amount of economic volatility that we're seeing?
HighRadius has been a first in many ways. Most of my previous experiences have been around coming in and then building a team. And while it may seem painful at the beginning, it's probably the easiest thing to do, because you're hiring people who you know are going to be the perfect fit for what you want to be doing. And you're hiring people after the sort of mindset that you have and so on. HighRadius inherited a 50-member team. Different challenge in terms of really entrenching yourself as a leader when you have an existing team in place and a high-performing team at that. So the first priority was really to ensure that all of us are aligned and shooting towards the same target, right? Second was to probably plug any gaps that we might have in terms of competencies on the team. Be it in terms of market mapping, market intelligence, leadership hiring, certain aspects of tech or go-to-market hiring. How do we fine-tune the individuals that we have on the team? How do we enable them to do better and do the best version of their work? And also onboard some critical talent to fill some of those gaps in competencies. So that's been one major gap that I've been working towards. The other has been very tight partnership with finance, because recruiting shouldn't necessarily be a downstream activity where the entire planning gets done and then you're just thrown some certain requisitions to fill. So this time we've moved a little more upstream, where we're working with the strategy team and the finance FP&A teams to figure out what the budgets are going to be, hence what headcount we need to hire, when do we need to hire them, so that there's more predictability in terms of how the recruiters go about their targets.
Now, I understand that one of your key areas of focus is also on global hiring, right? Given the India and Europe coverage that you have with your 50-member team now. So what would you say is the significance of global hiring requirements in especially today, being we're living in an interconnected world, right? So have they evolved over time in your experience?
Sure, and I'll probably answer this in two parts. One, my previous organization, Browser Stack, which went completely remote post the pandemic, and HighRadius, which is complete return to office. Right now, with Browser Stack, it obviously opened up more avenues for us to hire top talent from. We could hire across India, in Europe as well. We could hire across a lot of European countries where there was no visa challenge, etc. And that worked out beautifully for us. Some of the things with Europe was around the laws, how you hire in India and you just pick up the phone, give someone a cold call. You would not necessarily do that in Europe. It will land you in hot water because of the GDPR rules and things like that. So those were certain nuances that I had to be careful about. I still remember we were hiring someone in Germany for a data center, and that was my first experience with Germany hiring. And the offer contract had to be bilingual. And we didn't know how to do that. We had to work with lawyers and linguists sitting out of Germany to get that done. So some of those clauses, etc., with work councils, to be very careful in Europe when you hire and set up teams. In HighRadius, it's been a very different journey. When we started, we had setups in Amsterdam and London in Europe. And then we were looking to set up another center, which is going to be slightly more cost effective. We used the recruiting team actually worked very closely with business to actually zero down on Krakow in Poland as one of those locations. So we set that up from scratch at the beginning of the year. So that's been a great experience of setting that up from India. We didn't have a recruiter on the ground for Poland. So the team in London and Amsterdam and the team in India really pulled in together to make that happen. So I think that was a wonderful experience in setting that up.
So what might be the key stakeholders when you set up new processes like this, right? It requires not just, I would presume it's not just a talent acquisition professional, like as you said, it's legal, and it's also, there's several other parties. So who might be the stakeholders involved in making sure this process is set up right?
Sure. So in a small setup, it'll go right up to the CEO, really. Like most of the startups, it would be at the CEO level and the C-suite, where you have various functions pulling their weight, right? You have legal, you have finance, because the budgeting has to be right. And legal, not just the legal teams in India or US that we have, but also our partner firms in Europe, because again, you don't want to violate any labor norms when you're setting up these teams. There are things around what percentage of foreigners you can hire versus how many local folks you have to hire. So I think there are multiple departments involved, primarily legal, finance, and HR, along with talent acquisition, and then obviously the C-suite.
So in terms of global hiring requirements across different industries or sectors, or at least the ones that you have seen, Abhishek, are there any commonalities or are there any best practices that can be applied universally?
So the only two industries that I've worked in have been tech and med devices. With Alcon, I was also managing Asia hiring, except China. There are nuances in terms of what sort of in-mails people will respond to. I had to use Google Translator quite frequently.
Did that work for you though? Was it accurate?
It did. So when we were hiring in Vietnam and in Bangkok, actually, it worked pretty well. Got way more responses than sending out an email in English. And the same thing we experimented here when we were looking at Polish candidates. Translate in Polish, like pumped up our response rates by 25%. So that did work. However, that's not a generalization. There would be cases where it will not work, right? I've also realized that, and especially since most of the cases, LinkedIn has been the platform of choice for outreach. If you change your location to that particular country, it just helps. People think that, oh, you're there, you're a local person reaching out rather than someone sitting somewhere else. It does help in responses. People do go through folks' LinkedIn profiles, right, before they respond. So having like a formal picture in there, having enough written about your company and what you do adds more credibility, and hence chances of a response also goes up. So those would be some of the learnings, really.
You said that LinkedIn is obviously the platform of choice right now, right? But in terms of global hiring, are there other channels or other talent job boards or talent pools that you might tap into to get that kind of talent?
Right. So we have used other platforms. We've used Dice and Monster in the US. We've used AngelList in the US as well. However, the success that we've generally had has been limited on those platforms. Maybe we're not using it right. I don't know. But the volumes were not that high for us to use too many of those platforms. So we stuck to LinkedIn, and it worked out really well. And when you have at least a browser stack, when we set up our recruiting team, initially it was all in India, recruiting everywhere, right? Europe and US. But when we had some predictability in terms of what sort of volumes we may need to hire, we hired recruiters on the ground there. And back then, that was Ireland and in the US, everywhere. So that helped in terms of everything, response rates, conversions, and everything. And they all use just LinkedIn, nothing else.
In terms of, I think you've mentioned this before, you spoke about language and the importance of having your outreach translated to local language. But let me just, this is a bit more pointed as a question. How do cultural differences and language barriers impact global hiring requirements?
I remember having 0% response rates to folks that I reached out in Japan, even using Translate. Right. So clearly there are nuances there that I'm not necessarily aware of. And there could be things around salutation and how you actually reach out to people. Japan is a more relationship driven country than a place where people just respond to a cold in mail sent out. So the learning there was probably to reference someone who is a mutual connection, etc., and then build that rapport in the first part of the email, and then get to the business end of the email as to why I've sent the email, rather than being straight up upfront saying that, hey, there's an opportunity. So that would be one. Germany, I've seen people being very, very straightforward in terms of how they communicate and how they would like to be communicated to. They do not necessarily engage in small talk. They would want to get to the point and move on. So that's been another nuance in Europe. On the other hand, the Irish love to have fun, so there's always banter around soccer or what else.
So as a talent acquisition professional, it seems that when you go about doing global hiring, you almost have to wear different personalities and different kinds of communication methods.
Absolutely.
At the same time, even if you need to, right?
Yeah. And not just in terms of hiring folks, but even managing teams that are global. I think there are nuances there. Things that would motivate someone in India may not be something that motivates someone in London or Amsterdam, right? A certain managerial style may work really well in India. India is more like show and do, and you tell people how things are done and then they'll do it. Whereas in Europe, I've seen people to be way more independent. They would prefer being allowed to do stuff the way they want to do it. And then if something falls through the cracks, give them feedback and then they'll improve. So yeah, those nuances would apply to managing teams as well.
Are there specifics that candidates from different regions of the world, are there specific things that they ask during that introductory process? Is there a particular type of topic that they would like to find out more about, or are they looking for some answers in a specific segment?
Yeah, so I think, and that's that's there even within India, within a particular country as well, right? Depending on the profession that the person belongs to. Like a techie would want to know a little bit more about the sort of interesting challenges that they're going to work on, right? Are they going to work on cutting edge technology or not? How are they going to sharpen their skills? Money comes a little later. Versus a sales person or sales leader is going to talk about quota attainments, historical quota attainments, what sort of accelerators do we have in place, how often do people meet the quota, and so on. So there would be different courses for different horses in that sense, even within a particular country. I think, again, I may be generalizing a little bit too much, but I think in Europe, people have been more career focused than just compensation focused. Yeah, so they would switch for a career and not a job. In the US and India, I've seen people switch for jobs as well. Like if it's the same job at the same level, another company, higher pay, they would take it and try to make the best of it. Because for them, the job is not necessarily the center of the universe, at least in the US. It is just a means to get to things that they enjoy doing. So yeah.
Yeah. So it's not so much a matter of where they're based. It's really what motivates them in their segment, right? And so it really goes back to the individual at the end of the day. Yeah. So moving back to global hiring, what are some legal and regulatory considerations that organizations, even small organizations and the ones that have a mature process in place, what should they be aware of when they hire employees from different countries? Are there any examples you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So if any company has customers in Europe, they have to be GDPR compliant, right, in terms of data privacy. So for example, when we were evaluating an ATS, applicant tracking system, that was the first thing that we had to ensure that the tool is compliant to GDPR norms, because else data of candidates being stored indefinitely in a repository is a strict no-no, right? That's one. Secondly, what sort of data should we collect during the recruiting process, right? There are certain tools which we may have customized for usage in India, which helps in filtering out candidates easily in terms of potentially salary, or will they be willing to relocate, their marital status, etc. And I know of companies that have gotten into trouble when they've taken that same system global, because you would not necessarily ask those questions around marital status or status in terms of gender, etc., unless people would want to self-declare, right? So I think those are certain things that I've seen. Smaller setups, when they go global suddenly and they feel that whatever they have right now as an ATS or tools can just be scaled globally as is. I think that's one mistake. I would rather audit the processes, and it might take some time, but it's time worth taking rather than landing up in a legal mess later.
So then in that case, it's always good to sort of look forward or have a vision as to where the business is going before you invest in a tool that will be able to scale together with you in your plans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
In terms of technology, you said it yourself, you use Translate, and it's very quick and easy. You just go there and you get what you want and it works, right? So we've seen widespread adoption of AI into so many aspects of business. And how do you think TA professionals can benefit from artificial intelligence?
It's a great question, something really close to my heart, because I keep getting asked this in whichever conference I go to. And followed by this, and I'll probably clear the air on that, is, hey, are TA jobs going to get redundant because of AI, right? They won't, short answer. I think it's AI will always be an enabler, because there are certain decisioning which are EQ based, which cannot be made basis AI, right? So your AI is going to be able to parse data from your CV and tell you that, hey, there's this percentage match in terms of the job description and the keywords in the resume, but it won't say whether the person is a great culture fit. Right? or an AI may rank people basis skill sets, even if it's a tech role, but you won't really get to know their problem solving ability till you actually interview and ask them questions around their past experience, etc. So I think AI that way is going to help build in more efficiency in our roles, take away things that are slightly more repetitive, so that you have better data sets to be able to drive decisions till singularity hits. And I think I personally feel it's quite a bit
coming?
away. It's quite a bit away. I won't say no to anything after ChatGPT, but yeah, until that hits, I think we're good, right? And like they say, and I was on this panel, and this gentleman there, and I'll give credit there, referenced AI to a knife, right? Now, a knife can be useful or harmful depending on how it's used. The same thing for AI, right? It's about how it's used and whether it's used responsibly. I think we should be fine.
We have these enablers in place today, especially, right? And we have also different nuances that you deal with in different countries and different requirements coming into place. So, in terms of a talent acquisition professional in charge of global hiring, for instance, how would you describe the role of a talent acquisition professional in today's context?
In today's context, it's become more important because it's not just about filling recs, right? It's about finding the right match between an individual and a job. I would like to believe that we play a larger role than just filling recs for a company. We are also helping people make their careers, and if you are helping people make that right choice, they would trust you. And the biggest asset that a talent acquisition professional has, maybe after a decade or so of experience, is the network and the trust of that network in his or her ability to find the right fit for the candidate, right? So today, my biggest assets are people who I would have hired elsewhere, and hopefully they've had a great experience and they would want to work with me again, right? And there have been cases where it's really worked out well, right? People may have been very well settled in certain jobs, but would have taken a leap of faith because they feel that as a recruiting professional, you won't lowball them, either in terms of compensation or opportunity. I think that's one piece that I feel recruiters do not stress enough about, right? And I see enough people who are early in their career in recruiting who are just focused on, and which is great, right? Great energy, focused on executing and closing out recs, moving on to the next rec. But then how you treated people while closing that rec really, really matters. Talent pool is not growing any bigger. Opportunities are increasing in the market. And the talent pool is not necessarily keeping up in terms of speed of growth with the opportunities, right? Well, again, this sort of slow down BART. So if you were to look at that, then essentially you're revisiting your candidates at least once in 2 or 3 years. If you've not treated them well when you first interacted with them, they will not entertain another conversation, irrespective of which company you're in, right? So that's the real value that I think a talent acquisition professional should bring to the table. Like, do the right thing for the organization, but also do the right thing by the candidate.
It's one thing to build momentum. It's another thing to build momentum for it to last and to move forward, right? So, on that note, you also talked about, whoever is starting out and having a great experience in talent acquisition. So what advice would you give someone starting out in TA today?
Look at the bigger picture, right? A lot of TA professionals, at least earlier in their careers, operate like service providers or agencies, right? Yes, closing a role is very important, but closing a role with the right person is more important. So often we tend to forget that we are part of the HR function, and it's not like you just onboard someone and it becomes someone else's problem. Onboard a wrong person, it just hits your credibility. The person creates chaos within the organization. Then you only have to go back and backfill that position, because the person will go and backfill many more positions because of the chaos that the person might have created. So think holistically as an HR professional than just a TA professional. Always be curious. Again, I meet and interview multiple folks, and currently in the middle of interviewing for my team as well. So they've had great experiences, right? They've closed roles, etc. But they've not been curious to understand why. Why was that role important? Could the hiring manager have hired someone internally? Why is a certain tech stack important? Like tech recruiters not knowing tech is my biggest gripe, because they have to know a little bit of tech to be able to evaluate folks. You cannot always delegate responsibility of screening upwards, right? So I think that those two things, think like an HR professional, think broad rather than just filling roles, and be curious to learn.
For yourself, how do you keep up with the changes in the industry, especially in tech, knowing the roles and knowing the details of those roles, and how you should actually ask those questions to get the answers that would help you make a decision? So how do you keep up with those trends?
One of my managers told me back at LinkedIn, I think every challenge is an opportunity to learn something new. So wherever I feel there is a problem, that there's something that you can learn out of it, because it's not solved yet. I spend a lot of time with my hiring managers, even today, just to understand what the challenges are. And the technology market has been evolving really fast. So like DevOps, SRE, and now DevSecOps, that segment itself has evolved so fast that, and there are multiple open source tools coming in the market. So knowing enough then helps you differentiate good from better or good from bad, and helps then your team do better. So I spend a lot of time watching podcasts like these to know what thought leaders in the space are talking about. I read a lot, right? So I read a lot around M&A, around startup and SaaS space in general, and spend time with hiring managers. I think that has helped me so far.
Thank you very much for your time and your insights today, Abhishek. I think it was great to get a glimpse into the operational side and even the strategic side of going out there to different regions and hiring people from different regions in order to achieve in order to achieve your strategy, and also to know that you've inherited a team of 50, right? Was it 50? Yeah, inherited a team of 50. That's a large team, having to go out there to very big regions. I'm sure there are many people who, those listening in would be thinking about getting some validation into how they should think around global hiring. So thank you very much for your time and your insights. So drop us your contact details, Abhishek. Maybe the audience can connect with you after this.
I am available on LinkedIn as Abhishek Day, and my email ID, I'll pass on my official one. So it's abhishek.day@highradius.com.
Thank you, Abhishek. And we have been in conversation with Abhishek Day of HighRadius. Thank you for joining us. And remember to subscribe to stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruit.